All right, good evening. Welcome. My name is Pat Cawiezell. I am the buyer and author event coordinator at Magic City Books, and I want to thank you all for taking a little bit of time this evening to join us for the next in our virtual author program series. We've been doing this since April, and almost every single Monday and Thursday night, including holidays like today. And so we have a lot of great upcoming events that are scheduled, and even more being added to that schedule at magiccitybooks.com. If you're joining us for the very first time, thank you very much. We hope to see you again. If you're one of our regular watchers, then welcome back, and thank you very much for being here. We are really excited to showcase authors that we wouldn't be able to always get a chance to hear from and meet in person with our virtual series. We've been able to have authors join us from all over the country, and even occasionally we've had authors joining us from Europe for special kind of afternoon events, and we have some more of those probably on the way throughout the spring. Tonight, our author Dolores Johnson is joining us from Cambridge, Massachusetts, and you know, for a lot of books, there isn't always a ton of money to send an author on a big nationwide tour and do things. And so Zoom has really allowed us to connect with authors that we wouldn't have had that opportunity with, and really be able to showcase some books that we really believe in at Magic City, and stories that really need to be told. And so Say I'm Dead by Dolores Johnson is just one of those books. I read it over the weekend and really enjoyed the experience of reading it, even though a lot of the subject material is difficult and you know, it's not the kind of book that makes you always feel good in every chapter and that sort of thing. But I think it's a hopeful story, and one that you will enjoy as well. And so I am really excited to be joined tonight by Dolores Johnson. She has written for numerous publications, including Narratively, Buffalo News, Lunch Ticket, The Writer of Color Anthology, and more. She's consulted on diversity for universities, major corporations, and nonprofits. Served as a panelist for the Harvard Faculty Seminar on interracialism, excuse me. And she is the author of this new book that we will be discussing tonight, Say I'm Dead. And so welcome, Dolores.
Thanks, Pat, and thanks everyone who's joined us tonight. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, so Dolores, I'd like to just kind of get started by talking about the genesis for this book and kind of where we're opening up. The opening chapters of this book take place about 40 years ago, and like your kind of time, like your part of the story, I'd say starts 40 years ago, and then we go back and forward and some other things. But tell us a little bit about how you got interested in researching your family's history.
Actually, it started with Roots, the book that came out on searching your family history. That was really phenom in the mid-70s. Mm-hmm. When every article that you saw in a magazine or newspaper was about somebody discovering something amazing in their background, and I got the bug. I started out researching my dad's family because even though my father is African-American and my mother's white, I had been raised as a Black person with no recognition of my mother's blood. My birth certificate was stamped Negro. And that's because when I was born, there was no permission to be half white in this country. So I explored my father's genealogy through family stories, and I took a trip south and met some of these ancient old relatives who have all the secrets, and a lot of things were spilled, secrets were spilled, and I found out many things in my family history that had never been told to me. And when I looked at the genealogy chart that I prepared following all that research, I had about 50 or 60 people on there representing 5, 6 generations back to the African that arrived in Virginia. That was the root of my father in America. And I saw for the first time in my 30s that there was only one white person on that whole chart, and that was my mother. And when I looked at that, I thought she has to come from somewhere and somebody, but we had never heard who. And I had to know.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you talked a little bit about this, but this was a project that you were embarking on in the 1970s. This is pre-Google. This is pre-ancestry.com, pre-DNA testing. This is pre a lot of the things that can really help people in their research these days. And so you talked about, visiting relatives in the South and in Alabama and Georgia, the Alabama and Georgia relatives of your dad's. But how did you find them? How were you? I mean, you really needed those people to be able to get any information, was because you had to hear the stories from an actual living person.
Well, on my mother's side, first we had the gnashing of teeth, and in my family, when I brought up the question of where is the rest of our family tree, because it had never been spoken of. Mm-hmm. And once I decided that I was going to try to find my mother's family, I took a night school class called American Mosaic, and it was all about how all the families immigrated here from here, there, and everywhere, and they were all mixed. And how do you find out what your ancestry is? And in those days, it was all pencil and shoe leather, as you said. So I had to go to Indianapolis, which I finally got out of my parents, was where they met and where my mom's family was. So I went to a lot of the public institutions to review public records, which meant a lot of reading and looking through old papers and ledgers on my own. So the first was the city directory, something I'd never heard of, but this used to be a listing of everybody who lived in a city, sort of before the phone book thing. And the idea was to look for the names of the people that you wanted to find and keep looking as you advance through the years until their names disappear, which is the signal that they've either moved or died. And so I found my grandparents, my mother's parents, in the early 40s. And then shortly after she disappeared, within a few years, they weren't there. So I went to the Vital Records office. Now I have to drive across town and go upstairs in this big office building and to speak to the clerk who's handing out forms. And that's when I find out she comes back and she has a death certificate for my grandfather, but not for my grandmother, because she tells me record keeping is so sketchy in those days. Not everybody's records were recorded. And so before I left to go to Indianapolis, my mom had said to me, when you see Dad, I want you to memorize his face, come back and tell me everything about how he is. And when the first day I got there, he had been dead 30 years. Yeah. So the search went on like that. It was going to the old neighborhood where my mother had lived. It was going to her old church. It was reading, sitting in the basement of another municipal building in Indianapolis, reading these great big ledger books that all had the same precise handwriting in black ink that recorded every single marriage license. I read every one of them for 10 years, trying to find my aunt, her sister, and she wasn't there. The mystery was finally solved through church records. I had been calling the priests, they were Catholics, calling and leaving all these messages, and he's not returning my calls. And finally, when I'm at the airport ready to leave Indianapolis with only this one death certificate of my grandfather, I call him one more time and he answers the phone. He says, "Oh, I found your aunt's marriage license. She was married here at the church. And she had married a GI who was stationed in California." So I thought, how am I going to find them now? They're not even here. But I don't know if you want me to go on.
Please, yeah.
Okay, so I'm in the airport actually getting ready to fly home with only this death certificate. And that's in the days when phone books were printed and hanging on chains in phone booths. Right. So I hoist the book up on a little shelf and I look that name up and there it is on the phone book. And I call that number and a woman answers. And I say to her, now this is 36 years after my mother disappeared without a word. I say to her, you don't know me, but I think we might be related, and I want to see if you're the person I'm looking for. So she was kind of reluctant. She told me later she thought I was going to try to sell her something. But we went down this list of questions. I said to her, your father's name was Henry Lewis. He was an electrician. You lived at this address. You went to this church. And she was saying, yes, yes, yes. And I say, you had a sister who disappeared in the early 1940s. And I heard her suck in her breath. I said, her name was Myrna Elizabeth. She said, no. So I'm sitting there stunned. I don't know what to do. So I asked all those same questions over again. And then it occurs to me, I say, her nickname was Ella. She said, Ella, yes, that's my sister. That's my sister. But who are you? So I say to her, I am your niece. I'm Ella's daughter. She said, well, how can that be? Because we think Ella was dead. And so I say to her, I've been looking for you. I want to tell you the story. I want to meet you, but I'm in the airport getting ready to go home. And this is, how fate is. At that time, they posted a 2-hour delay on my flight. And so I say, I'm at the airport, and she says, you stay right there. I am coming right now. She didn't say, what do you look like, or what gate, or what airline. She hung up, and now I'm waiting. I'm standing there waiting, and I don't know who I'm looking for. And there's all these people. This is before TSA. Everybody's rushing around. Babies are melting down the rattle of the cleaning carts. It's a whole scene. And I'm looking everywhere. And I see this woman way down the concourse. And she's more or less staggering towards me. She has her eyes fixed on me. And she walks right up to me and says, it's you, isn't it? I see my sister in your face. That's how I found them.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about kind of move backwards a little bit and talk about growing up. You grew up in Buffalo, and what that experience was like with a Black father and a white mother at a time when, as you report in the book, a Pew Research study from the late 50s, after your parents have been married for a number of years, after you and your older brother, your siblings have been born, and your children, a Pew Research study that about 95% of Americans did not approve of a mixed race marriage, and you are the product of one of two loving parents who have this nice family trying their best to raise them. Tell us a little bit about what that experience was like growing up in a time when nearly everyone in the country would disapprove of your parents' relationship.
Well, people made their disapproval very well known to us. And the fact was that, as a mixed couple, my parents lived in a Black neighborhood. They couldn't live in a white neighborhood. As a matter of fact, white neighborhoods were not renting or selling to Black people. This was the 40s. And so everything in our world was around Black people. And my parents told me a number of stories of things that happened when we were growing up. Some I remember, some are according to them. For instance, we went to have a picnic out in a park. And we had a shed, with barbecue grill and swings and everything. And my two brothers were older. They went out on a hike into this ravine. And, they came back filthy, and one of them was screaming because he got into a hornet's nest. And he was rolling around on the ground, and, the stingers were everywhere on him. And my mom was trying to comfort him and trying to get the stingers out. And this white woman walks by going to the facilities, and she very graciously comes by and offers to help. And she starts making mud packs with dirt and water and putting them around the stingers. And then they come out just like a toothpick out of a fresh cake. And pretty soon my brother has calmed down, and things come back to normal. And my father comes out of the shed, and he puts his arm around my brother. And the woman looks at my mother, and then to my father, and back to my mother, and her hand flies across her mouth, and she takes off running as if she had been in the hornet's nest. We had those kinds of experiences a lot in public. There was an amusement park that we went to in Canada, which is right across the Niagara River from Buffalo. People in Buffalo go back and forth to Canada to buy cigarettes and have dinner and whatever. So we were going over there, and they had a little ferry ride, this ornate ferry. And we get on, and this woman is already on the ferry with her kids. And when she sees us, she shoves her kids into a corner and stands guard so that they won't have to touch us. This kind of thing went on all the time. And my mom had no friends when she first came to Buffalo. Of course, she knew nobody there. And she was introduced to my father's family at a birthday party. That was a few weeks after they had married. And there was a ruckus over her because the idea that he brought a white woman into the Black community and into the Black family was something that nobody had ever dreamt of. So the issue about being a mixed race family was both on the Black and the white side. We got it from everybody. And later, as I began to research my book, I spoke to one of the elders on my father's side whose birthday party it was. And I asked her all about it. And I said, why did you guys leave my mother out? There were so many family occasions and parties that we were never invited to. Why did you guys, treat us like that? She said, well, the truth of the matter is we were scared. Here was your father, a Black man, with a runaway white woman that he had married. They had come from Klan country, and it was against the law to get married. We knew the law was going to show up with guns, and we didn't want to be anywhere in the middle of that. So we stayed away.
Yeah. Well, how did your parents meet? How was it that, in the 1940s, the early 1940s, how were they able to meet and be able to socialize enough, and where could they go as a couple on dates and get to know each other to the point that they knew that to fall in love and marry each other? How did that work?
They both worked at the same electrical company. And my father was the handyman. My mother was the mail clerk. And they sent the handyman down to build shelves for the packages and boxes that were coming in. And my mother says that he was so well-spoken, so well-groomed, so efficient at his work that she had never known any Negroes personally. But she was watching him and she was making small talk with him and thinking, all those things they say about Negroes, that they're murderers and they're shiftless and they're ignorant. Well, that's true. Look at this guy here. He's a really nice guy. And my father was thinking, wow, here's this white woman who's talking to me like I'm a regular man, not just treating me as some kind of servant to be ordered around and keeping her distance out of fear or loathing, but they marveled at each other in that way. And so when my father approached her, he told her he'd been practicing in his mirror at home because he was kind of, nervous about approaching a white woman. And he said to her, I don't want to be out of line, and I hope this is okay with you, but I want to tell you I like you very much. And she stared at him for a while. And then she said, I've been thinking about you too. And so he told her, I'd like to take you out, but I can't do that. The Klan is running Indianapolis. I can't take you out. But if you want to come to my place, I'll make you a nice dinner and see you there. And so they arranged for her to take a taxi from her house to the train station and then find a Black taxi to take her from there to his house so nobody could trace her steps. And they did all of their courting in secret moments at work. He found a million excuses to go to the mailroom and at his place.
Right.
Because actually, not long before they took up, there had been a double lynching outside of Indianapolis. And my father had seen this, and there's a photograph in my book of the lynching, where people came out to mill around and socialize as the bodies hung in the trees right in front of them. A studio photographer took that photograph and then printed it onto postcards and sold them like circus souvenirs to white people who wanted a keepsake. This was actually done at most lynchings in America. And my father had seen that picture in the barbershop, hanging up in the black barbershop, where he had been warned not to take any chances because nobody had been called to account, and the Klan was the law in Indianapolis.
So after your parents came to Buffalo, and as you said, I mean, it was a lonely time for a number of years, but they were able to find a social group. There were some other families, some other mixed race families that were in Buffalo, and there was kind of a social network. It seemed as though, really, particularly for your mom, to be able to have some friends that she could call upon, that were experiencing very similar things in their own life, the same things, and they even had a name for the group that I rather enjoyed. So tell us a little bit about getting together with that group.
Yeah, that was the Click Club.
Yeah.
My mom had been educated in Catholic schools, and she wanted my oldest brother to go to Catholic school. So she took him to first grade at the local parish. And she saw another white woman with a brown child. And that woman came over and introduced herself and invited my mom to coffee. And she said, there's a group of us here in town in Buffalo that you would want to meet. We're going to, we get together all the time and make our own fun. Because, of course, as I told you, the atmosphere was not welcoming to mixed race people. And it turned out that most of these women were white Catholics married to black jazzmen. And they had a nightclub called the Moonglow in Buffalo. And it was the place where people came from Toronto and from Ohio and Pennsylvania and all over Western New York to hear this jazz. And they had a great floor show. The men wore white tuxedo jackets, and they had these dancers that did the floor show. And some of you may remember the funk singer Rick James. He had the song Super Freak and some other big hits. His mom was one of the dancers in that show. And so the Click Club was basically mixed race people who had met each other through this show business connection. And their children became my cousins. We had lots of holidays and parties and picnics and, first communions and dance recitals and all of that. And they normalized being mixed race. When I wrote my book, I went and found all of those families again, and the kids that I grew up with, who were scattered all over the United States. Some of them were in Las Vegas, show business people. Some had gone to Dallas and New York. And so I got on the plane and went and dug them all up and recreated the stories from the Click Club, cross-checking them one to the other, and crying over everybody's kitchen table about our lives.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about, how hard it was kind of from all angles. It was not just one part of society that was looking on mixed race families as difficult. When you tell the stories, you don't need to tell us whether it was a white woman that didn't like seeing your parents together or a black woman. They both didn't like seeing your parents together.
That's right.
And of course, being a mixed race individual, your skin is lighter than other Black children, and there is a wide array. But as you say frequently in the book, in America, especially when you were growing up, that there wasn't a choice. You weren't two things; you were one thing in the eyes of everyone in America. Certainly at that time, and really even today, it's hard to see that mixed race people have a hard time getting that aspect of their lives in front of people, that people don't understand, kind of that they can be Black and white, that they have both sides of them. Tell us a little bit about, how that kind of changed, or how that happened throughout your life as a child, but then also as you're going into your corporate career.
Well, one thing that has happened to me repeatedly, and I hear the exact same thing from almost every mixed race Black and white person that I've ever met, and I know many, that people look at me and they can't, it unsettles them. The sight of me unsettles them. So often, even in public, people I've never met and have no relationship to will come up to me and get really close and say, "What are you?" That we have this binary understanding of race in America. You're either Black or you're white. So the olive complexion and the curly hair gives pause. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've had people ask me, "Are you Hispanic? Are you Italian?" That was something that was asked of me in South Carolina. "Are you Indian? Are you Greek? Are you Jewish? Are you Egyptian?" It's like the othering that goes on in America. So if you're not white, you're some other. But what other has been an issue. But anyway, it took years for me to work through that. And the fact that I learned who my white family was and got to know them has given me, very solid confidence in my mixed race, because I have a foot in both camps. Yeah. But at work, after obtaining a Harvard Business School degree, I went into corporate America, highly qualified, competent, hard worker, very well organized, ready to go, and found that people didn't want to listen to me or see me. They saw me as a Black person, and in the 70s, that was still grounds for being discounted, no matter what you said or did. And I had to learn to code switch, which is where you shut off your natural tendencies of, let's say, if I'm around Black people, there might be some jokes that include Ebonics, and I know what they're saying to me, and I can say it back to them, but I would never say it in corporate America, because when white people hear you speaking a dialect, they discount you as ignorant. You don't speak the King's English, there's something wrong. And so my husband and I used to, at night, because he had also an important job as an armaments engineer, we would practice what we were going to say at the office the next day and how we would say it, how we were going to stand, how we were going to filter things out and be sure not to say or do X, Y, and Z. What clothes were we going to wear that seemed to be the choices that white people liked, so they could see us. There were so many moments at work where you would hesitate, where you would filter and translate before you did your work with the team. And I was in product management, which is where you're creating new products and bringing them out. And so you're dealing with the lawyers and the accountants and finance and the engineers and every department in the company, the manufacturing plants, and you're dealing with all white people. My husband and I were always the only Black people in our work settings. And after a time, I got really proficient at that game, but it was exhausting to make sure that the person who I felt most comfortable being was not the one I could bring to work and show. And I talk to Black people now. I talk to Black students at Harvard Business School now, and they tell me it's still the same. They have to filter out so much of who they are and they have to practice speech patterns and clothing choices and food choices and all this in order to fit in at work, which only says that, you know, America hasn't understood really the depth of what diversity means. But it was in that environment, that very tiresome extra job of code switching, that I kind of pulled back and said, you know, I have to be true to myself. And I think one way to do that is to get anchored in my father's genealogy, because I was doing these things when Roots was on television. And that was part of what triggered my search.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're going to take just, and I want to make sure that I mention, if you're watching this on Zoom right now, that we have a live Q&A section available. You can post your question there for Dolores, and we'll get to those as time allows tonight. And if you are interested in buying a copy of Say I'm Dead, we have a link in the chat and links on magiccitybooks.com that you'll be able to click on that link and purchase a copy. We ship all over the United States, or you can come down to the store in downtown Tulsa and pick up a copy. So, Dolores, this kind of backdrop of your mixed race family story is the changing national perspective on miscegenation, and I'm curious what you see as the trajectory of mixed race attitudes in the United States now.
You know, you summed up the book very nicely there, because it does show the arc of attitudes in America over time towards race mixing. One thing we didn't talk about yet was the fact that when I went south to meet my father's older relatives, I found out that my grandmother was also half white. She was the product of a plantation rape. Her mom was 14 or 15, sharecropping on the same plantation where my ancestors were slaves, and was repeatedly raped by a white man. And so what I have to say about mixed race is that it began in slavery times. Mm-hmm. Whenever we look at mixed race people in this country, we have to think about the fact that Africans were no longer legally imported into the United States after 1820. So how do you keep the plantations going? How do you get more slaves when the old ones die and you expand your grounds and your business? By raping the Black women to produce more slaves. That's the genesis of race mixing in America. Move forward to my great-grandmother being raped in the 1880s to produce my grandmother. Move forward to the 1940s when my parents met during Jim Crow and it was illegal and dangerous to get married. Move forward to my generation where I had to figure out how to plant my feet in and accept both sides of my heritage and realize that I am that person. Move to my daughter. I married an African-American who was a good brown skin color, and my daughter is brown skin African-American. She married a Jewish guy, and they have a mixed race son. So as we look at the statistics that follow that arc of circumstances, we start with the registration of mixed race people in the US Census as mulattoes, quadroons, octoroons, hair splitting every possible percentage in order to justify the one drop rule that if you have one drop of Black blood in America, you're Black, to the time that the first study that I can cite is the Pew Research study in 1958, where 96% of Americans were against race mixing. And then in 1967, the Supreme Court heard the Loving case, which was a mixed couple that had, they were in Virginia and it was against the law to be married. So They were taken to court and told, you can either leave Virginia and stay gone for 25 years, we don't want to see or know you here, or you can go to jail. But based on that case, in 1967, those laws were all overturned in the United States, and there were still 73% of Americans who disapproved of race mixing. In the 80s, the number of that disapproved went down to around 50. And then in the recent 2000s, census reports, Pew Research, and Gallup have reported, this accelerating trend towards race mixing. So in the 2010 census, the report said that the growth rate of mixed race babies, that's all races marrying all races, that growth rate outstripped the growth rate for single race babies by 3 to 1. And their projection is that by mid-century, the mixed race population in America will be near 20%, which is bigger than the Hispanic population is today in America. So we have moved the arc quite a bit forward.
Right. And still, even now, on official forms or even semi-official forms, often, a person of mixed race heritage is only allowed to choose one item. It's a single checkbox that they're allowed to put in. They can't list multiple races. There's the attitudes have certainly improved, and it is better now. There's also, the official forms and all that other stuff that kind of comes with it that still wants to push people into one box.
Yeah, I think that the transition into full acceptance of this element of our demographic has some work to do. However, the census itself in the 2000 census and the 2010 had a mixed race category where you could check off any permutations of 124 mixtures. So they're beginning to recognize it. And I think some applications around perhaps colleges and other institutions are leaving a space for you to fill in if you want to claim more than one race.
Right. Yes. We have a question from Jennifer. She wants to know, how did your parents feel about the ancestry research you were doing?
Oh, Jennifer, thanks for the question. When I talked to them about where was our white family, they were so upset with me. They had a 36-year-old secret that they didn't think anybody would ever know. And here I was disrupting that. My mom was in tears, and she didn't want anything to do with it. The title of the book comes from that conversation with our family, where I said to her, I want to go and find these people. I need to see who they are and what kind of blood is running in my veins, and whether or not that whiteness has anything to do with who I am. And she said to me, I know what you're saying about yourself, what you want, but what I want is nothing to do with this. I can't face them after 36 years. They're the rebukes and the guilt, all that, I just can't do it. And I said, well, if I go and find them and I meet them, what am I supposed to say about you? And she said, say I'm dead. Title of the book. I eventually talked her out of that stance, but it was not for months.
There are a lot of strong women in the book, yourself, your mom, that we've talked more about tonight, but there are many strong women in the book, and each seem to go against their tide in their own way. And so what drove, were there different things that drove these women, or, do you think that there was kind of a through line for what these strong women in your book all wanted?
When we reunited with my mom's family, we were given a photograph when she married my dad, she, went off quickly without many things. She had pretended to go on vacation. And so she didn't have her pictures, but we were given a picture of her when she was 4 and sitting there with her parents. That would have been 1914. And her mom had this very determined look in her eyes. I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to accept my white family because I had had so many racial incidents in my life that were difficult, very difficult. But when I saw that woman, I saw myself because I'm also a determined person. And my mom, she really was a maverick, what she did, bucking every obstacle to marry the man she wanted. So I feel like it's just a character trait of the women in my line.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as we mentioned at the top, the research that you were doing for this, started in the late 70s, and your book was published last summer. And so kind of, what was the process from taking it as a research project, a deeply personal project of research, to wanting to kind of put this together in a narrative format and sharing it with others?
Well, I worked for a time with some mid-career journalists who were quite distinguished in their field. And it so happened that there were some classes going on what was called narrative journalism. And that's what we have in a lot of the news that we see today. It didn't used to be the way to report news in the Walter Cronkite days, which was just the facts. In narrative journalism, there's sort of a backstory. You're going to start with a person and what happened to them, and you're going to draw it into a larger context. And as I learned how to do that technique and talked with these journalists, I got to know them on a personal level, and they wanted to know about my story. And when they heard it, they said, Dolores, you should write a book. This is an amazing story that should be a book. And I didn't take them too seriously in the beginning, but I heard that comment from a number of people, not just those journalists. And I decided I would write a book. That was, as I say, about 8 years ago. Yeah, that I got started. And when I wrote my first draft, because I had been in corporate America for so long, I wrote it the way I worked. And that was, I put down my story quickly, because in business, everything is due yesterday.
Right.
And there's not a lot of fluff to it. It's just, the facts. Anyway, I gave it to a writing teacher at a local university, and she said to me, what you have here is a business report. She said, this is not a story for public consumption. You don't know anything about creative writing. And the more we talked about it, the more I saw that I didn't. And so I went back to school. I took a 1-year intensive MFA equivalent course in creative writing. And then it was on.
Right.
I seriously was writing my book.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, from that first draft to the finished product, this, Say I'm Dead is a very readable, very, as I said at the beginning, it's not necessarily one where you're going to feel good about every chapter. There's some, things that happen in the book, and just America's history with race that still angers you, and the idea that these things are over, that it's a time that's something from some other part of our history is not true. But we are, I think that stories like yours being told help to have readers, expand beyond their own horizons and realize that, there are universal feelings, and that just like your parents finally having someone kind of of a different race treating them with respect and with interest and like a real person really can make a difference. And I think that your book is adding to that narrative.
Yeah, thank you very much for saying that. I had that intention. Finally, as I did the last revisions on the book, my hope was to stimulate conversation of that type, have people realize, as you said, what the history of this country has been around this topic, and that, no, the difficulty is not over. And if you indulge me, I just want to say that today is Martin Luther King Day, and some of his quotations have inspired a lot of us. And I picked out a few that I wanted to honor his legacy today by telling you the ones that I think shine on my book. You know, he didn't ask us to do anything that was easy, but he did change America through nonviolent love. And the love in my book is what I want to focus on here. He said, "I've decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear." And I think through all the things that my family went through, all the way back to the plantation rape and slavery and all of that, that's how my family has looked at it. We choose love. Love overcomes race. He also said, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." So those are some words that I really wanted us to give a moment of reflection to.
That's right. We have one more question here from Jan. I think this is going to be a good one to close it out, but copies of Say I'm Dead are available at Magic City Books. We also have the link in the chat, and you can go to magiccitybooks.com to be able to buy Say I'm Dead by Dolores Johnson and check out our other upcoming events and purchase those books as well. We're going to close with a question from Jan, which is, do you have a relationship with relatives on both sides of your parents' sides now?
Yes, Jan, I do. And as a matter of fact, while I've been doing my virtual book tour, I did a couple of programs in Indianapolis, and my cousins, my white cousins, got on the air with me and talked about our relationship. And on the Black side, yes, I do have cousins and other relatives back in Buffalo, and I never got to know the relatives down south that well because we didn't live down there. But yes, we have a fully integrated family. And I'll have to say, my brother David, who was a Black militant, and my white cousin Tony, Antoinette, were big football fans. And, she cheered for the Colts, Indianapolis Colts, and he for the Bills. And after the family got together, the two of them would get on the phone and, trash talk each other about the football games. And then they started getting on the plane when there was a matchup. And there were the two of them, him with this afro like this, and Antoinette, they buy these tickets together, go to the game and, trash talk the whole time. So the relationship became quite full. My mother and her sister had 26 years together after we were reunited, where we had 4th of July picnics. We went to the Indianapolis 500 race all together. We had weddings and funerals and anniversary parties and sitting around trading recipes and everything that any family would do.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And, I think that is just so indicative. If there are estranged members of a family, that seeking them out, that a lot of time, it is true that time can heal some of the wounds and people, miss that relationship. And so I think that your book provides some hope for people who may find themselves estranged from family members or people that they used to care about and find that, those people are missing them as well.
It's true, because My parents were cut off from my mother's family for those 36 years. And the assumption was when I was going back to find them, maybe they don't want to see you. Maybe they don't want to meet you.
Yeah.
Maybe you're making a big mistake. But it was a complete opposite. Their arms flew open. My aunt said, "You mean my sister is still alive and we've missed all these years we could have been together?" She didn't care that my mother married a Black man.
Right.
I had to see my sister. And so, yes, I would say if you have an estrangement, reaching out can change your situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Dolores, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Best of luck to the book and your future events with it. We hope to see you in Tulsa one of these days when things can be a little bit safer to gather together again and travel more safely.
Thanks very much. I'd love to come out.
Yeah. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Have a very pleasant evening. We'll be back again next Monday with our next virtual author program. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Bye-bye. Thank you.